Hello and welcome back to Motivated with Meg. This is season 1, The Eating Experiment, where we toss out the food rules and explore how food and freedom connect. Remember that I am not here to make you follow any type of dieting rules. Instead, think of me as your motivator, hoping to light the fire under your butt to try new self-care focused habits. Today's episode, we are debunking a few common food myths to help notice confirmation bias and diet mentality. If you've been listening along since the beginning of the podcast, you've heard some of my personal stories around food, dieting, and overeating. As I talk about the myths today, don't judge yourself if you've ever believed or acted on any of the myths I bring up. At one point in my life, I believed all 3 of these myths and created my eating habits and health routine around them. And that's why we're talking about them today. So let's start first by looking at the definition of myth to help lay the foundation of this podcast episode. So a myth is a widely held but false belief or idea. Myths can be based on misunderstandings, misinformation, or cultural stories that have been passed down without being fact-checked or scientifically verified. Recently, I've been seeing a lot of Instagram reels that kind of talk about this, right? It's like somebody's like, where did you get your information before the internet? And it's like, yeah, I just went up to my parents and asked them a question and they gave me an answer. And then I believed that answer because there was nowhere to research it. I just carried that answer with me incorrectly throughout life until I found out the truth. And that is how a lot of myths happened over the years, is that we didn't have the internet. It wasn't as easy to look up information and check facts, right? And so it is just misinformation and misunderstandings that have been spread and passed down generation to generation. And so myths are often, they seem credible. They seem like real. There's something about them that really resonates. And that's often because there's a small grain of truth within a myth, kind of like a good joke. There's some truth in it, or it aligns with a common assumption. But myths aren't backed by reliable science. There's no evidence behind myths. And so in the context of health and food, a myth often arises from oversimplifications or outdated ideas about nutrition. Like, for instance, believing that a food is inherently bad, or that there's a quick fix like a fad diet that can lead to some type of sustainable, healthy improvement. So these myths, they can lead people, like myself in the past, to make choices that don't truly support my well-being or maybe your well-being. So let's take a look at a few myths today and then go over this week's experiment together. So I took 3 common myths, all 3 I've believed in at one point in my life, and we want to look at these myths with a logical, more evidence-based approach to help debunk them. And so myth number 1 are carbs are bad and they cause weight gain. So let's look at this. Many popular diets vilify carbohydrates. I've said this in a few episodes now, claiming that they are the main cause of weight gain and should be just drastically reduced or eliminated. Right? This is a myth because carbohydrates are essential macronutrients that provide the body with energy, especially for the brain and muscles. Like if you were about to go take the SATs or a big test, one piece of advice you might get would be to have, oatmeal or a high carbohydrate breakfast because that's going to help your brain functioning for that test, right? So carbs are not bad. Cutting them out completely can lead to nutrient deficiencies and energy imbalances. And so the science here is nutritional balance, right? The body needs a variety of macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins to function optimally. And the quality of carbohydrates, right? So whole grains versus refined sugars, both are carbs, is more important than the quantity. And so the myth carbs are bad and cause weight gain is because, there's some truth there, right? Because increased sugar intake or eating like a bunch of processed carbohydrates, that might cause weight gain, partially because you're overeating and also because they aren't balanced nutritionally. And so it's not that all carbs are bad, and it's not to vilify certain carbs over others. It's just to bring awareness to confirmation bias when it comes to thinking that all carbs are bad and cause weight gain. Because a diet with a balanced carbohydrate ratio can still support weight loss if that's your goal, or it can also maintain your current weight if it aligns with your energy needs. So carbs aren't bad. It's more about the amount you're taking in and the type you're taking in. And it's not that one type is bad and one type is good either, right? It's just about quantity and quality. And so then there's a sustainability check, right? So extreme low carb diets, they often aren't sustainable in the long term because they lead to energy crashes, cravings, and micronutrient deficiencies like fiber and vitamin B. And so looking at that myth, carbs are bad and they cause weight gain, we've just debunked that myth by looking at the science behind it, nutritionally balanced meals, and what our body needs to function optimally. I'm not here trying to tell you like there's a hard rule, you need to go eat carbohydrates. Nope. Do what you want to do, experiment and see how it feels for yourself. And that's what today's goal is, to see how looking at your own confirmation bias and the myths you might believe in when it comes to food, and playing around with those and see how it actually feels versus just continuing to believe those myths. So myth number 2 is around detox diets and juice cleanses, some of which I've done many of in my life because I thought I needed to, right? And so detox diets and juice cleanses claim to flush out toxins from the body, often by drastically restricting food and relying on liquids for nourishment. And so this is a myth because the body has its own efficient detox system. It's the liver, the kidneys, and the digestive tract. They naturally move waste and toxins without needing extreme diets. And so the science here is that you biologically already detox with your organs, like your liver and kidneys. They work around the clock to neutralize and eliminate harmful substances and toxins. And there's no real scientific evidence that supports that a juice cleanse enhances this process. Juice cleanses often lack sufficient protein, fats, and fiber, leading to muscle loss, energy crashes, and nutrient imbalances. And so while some people might lose water weight on a cleanse, it's not sustainable for long-term health and often leads to rapid regain of lost weight when normal eating resumes. So the reason you might feel good if you've ever done a detox diet or a juice cleanse, which I've done, is you most likely right before it, you were overeating and you're eating junk food, right? Or lots of processed foods. And then you're like, oh, I have to go cleanse because I've been overeating. So then you go from this extreme of overeating to this extreme of undereating and giving your body all these nutrients from these juices and stuff that do have nutrients in them. And so that's why it feels so amazing, is that you just started giving your body what it needed more of, right? It's not that you cleansed out something and detox. It's that you actually fed your body a little bit of what it needed, which were nutrients. But the issue here is, as it said, it's almost always liquid nourishment. So it's missing fiber and protein and other aspects that help you feel full that lead to you not overeating later on in the day, maybe. So that's myth number 2, detox diets and juice cleanses. Again, if you've done them, you don't have to judge it. If you like them and you want to continue doing them, that's okay too. I drink juices. Like, I literally have frozen fruit in my freezer and a blender, and I make myself juices and smoothies all the time. It's not that I don't enjoy those or have them. I just don't look at them as like, oh, I need to detox and juice cleanse and I can't have any other food with this. It's just, I found that I enjoy them and I like them and they feel good. So I have those alongside my nutritionally dense meals. Myth number 3 is that low-fat or fat-free products are healthier choices. You've probably heard this before. Many people believe, myself included in points in my life, that choosing a low-fat or a fat-free version of a product is healthier because it reduces the calorie intake and prevents fat consumption, which will then lead to weight loss. Because so many of us believe that, fat creates fat, right? So if I eat fat, I'll get fatter. And that's not how it works. Although fat has more calories in it than protein and carbohydrates, that's not necessarily how it works. Because here's the issue with low-fat and fat-free products are healthier, is that when fat is removed from a product, the manufacturer of that product often adds in something else like sugar or sodium or an artificial ingredient to compensate for the lost flavors and textures when removing fat or sugar. And so this can result in a product that is actually higher in sugar and lower in nutrients than its full fat counterpart. And I used to do this with yogurt. I'm lactose intolerant, so I really don't eat yogurt anymore. But when I used to eat yogurt, I would almost always go for the fat-free one or the low sugar option. And then I would be hungry again pretty early on. And the reason for that is that fat and being satiated, the feeling of fullness, go hand in hand. So fat plays a key role in making you feel satisfied after a meal. And eating healthy fats like those in avocados and nuts and olive oils, they can all help you feel fuller for longer, reducing the urge to snack on empty calorie foods later. And this, again, it's not about snacking being good or bad. It's like, here you are maybe trying to find this low fat food to reduce the calories you take in and lose your weight that you want to lose, but then it doesn't make you feel full. So then even though you chose this low-fat, fat-free food, you end up eating more because you're not full because the food didn't have the fat you needed in it. And then the last thing we want to look at with this myth when it comes to low-fat and fat-free foods is, diets that overemphasize low-fat products like this, they often lead to imbalanced eating patterns, like I was talking about earlier, getting hungrier and needing to snack more later because the food you ate wasn't balanced nutritionally. It didn't make you feel satiated for a long period of time. So those are the 3 myths that I wanted to cover today, and there's a lot of other myths out there. So if those myths resonated with you and you want to talk about them more, comment below, DM me. If you have other myths that you want to talk about, comment below, DM me. Let's get a conversation going about this. And one thing I want to reiterate here is confirmation bias. I've talked about it in a few episodes. And it's important to look at confirmation bias because what it does is that it creates selective, it creates belief in selective information, that it supports your existing view while ignoring evidence that contradicts those beliefs. So in the world of nutrition, people often cling to a food myth like carbs are bad because they resonate with the personal experience of it and the social influence, when science often disproves it. So for instance, if every time you've ever tried to lose weight, and when you do the diet that says carbs are bad, don't eat carbs, you lose weight. And when you do the diet that says carbs are good, you can eat carbs and you don't lose weight, then your personal experience is that when I eat carbs, I don't lose weight, right? And then if you have anybody else in your life that has that same experience, the social influence there is like, yeah, carbs are bad. But science disproves that. And so individually, you might not do great with carbs, and that might be you. That's okay. And you can experiment with that. If certain carbs don't sit well with you, that's fine. But is it that certain carbs don't sit well with you? Or is it that you're not even willing to try to eat these carbs because you've already decided that, you believe this myth that carbs are bad? And this is where we want to just kind of like take off the blinders, let go of the myth, and start to experiment with these myths. So tying in food myths and confirmation bias, if someone believes that low-fat products are healthier, they may only read articles supporting this idea, ignoring any research showing that a low-fat food contains added sugars or additives, like I was just talking about. So they might ignore that, and they're just like, nope, I just believe that low-fat products are healthier, so I'm going to keep eating those, even though there's research showing that low-fat products have more sugar and additives in them. And so I encourage critical thinking as you go about this week's experiment, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And when it comes to critical thinking, just try to look at your own biases when evaluating health information. Are you selectively choosing information that confirms what you already believe? Which is fine to do. It's fine to look up information to back up what you believe, but that's where we want to do some logical thinking. Is this sustainable? Does this make sense? Could this be a myth? Really look at it, try to debunk the myth, look for evidence that contradicts your belief to make sure it's not falling into confirmation bias. So this week's experiment is to challenge your assumptions and to get better at noticing any myths that come up for you and if you believe them or not. So I encourage you to confront your own confirmation biases and assumptions around food by experimenting with myths, either the ones I just listed or any that come up for you that I didn't list. So just pick one for this week. If you want to do more than one, go for it. You don't have to, but just pick one that you have believed in the past or you still currently believe, such as carbs are bad. And for this week, try experimenting with that. Maybe try eating a balanced meal with carbohydrates and healthy fats in it, and then keep track of how you feel. Did it make you feel full and satiated and help with hunger and cravings, or did it lead to feeling bloated and crappy and tired? And then try to compare those results. Did the experiment match your belief and expectation? By challenging these assumptions through experimentation, you can break free from confirmation bias and begin to notice your own food myths that you're believing in and let go of those by relying on science-based evidence rather than myths. So this exercise is to help empower you to make informed, sustainable, healthy choices for yourself, despite whatever common food myths you might currently believe or have believed in the past. As you go into this experiment this week with food myths and getting better at noticing yours and maybe questioning them, I recommend continuing to practice any of the other experiments that are working well for you. You can do that anytime you remember to, whether it's mindful bites, noticing hunger and fullness and honoring it, beginning to be aware of your cravings and what is behind them, or even awareness around diet culture around you or your own personal diet mentality. And these food myths are part of your diet mentality, and it's also part of diet culture. And so it's just bringing awareness to this and more awareness to what is going on internally for you and how you don't even realize that you have this belief in a food myth, but you might be taking actions consistently based off of that subconscious belief. So we are just bringing full awareness to it. And that's it for today. I really hope that you enjoy this week's eating experiment, which is not so much about the food you're eating. It's more about your own beliefs and looking at those and the myths and confirmation bias around the food you choose or how you act around food. And then continuing to practice some of the other tangible habits, like chewing your food more, taking mindful bites, and the hunger and fullness scale, while looking at the less tangible, more internal experiments like getting clear and aware of your own myths around food, confirmation bias, diet mentality. So those are your experiments as we continue moving forward, is to keep working on anything that's working well for you as we keep adding in small experiments each week. All right, until next time, be kind and be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.